All right. So once again, thank you for joining me today. Welcome, everyone. Today's going to be a very simple but hopefully informative presentation on Vitalist Herbalism. So I guess there's a lot of things that I could say about it, or different ways that I could allude to it. Bioregional herbalism is a term I've used for a long time, and they're very closely related. And I'll get into each as we go along. And here, the title of this presentation, Vitalist Herbalism, A Journey of Self-Discovery and Healing. I think that's really important to point out from the start. Yes, it's a mystery, and no, I don't know all the answers to that mystery. As an instructor or a facilitator of learning, uh, and that's, I think, a more appropriate term for myself and what I do, and how I feel my work can impact people, is to help facilitate their own journey of self-discovery and healing with the plants. So that's one of the fundamental ways where I feel Vitalist herbalism differs. Uh, and I'll get into more of that as we go along. But fundamentally, it's out of respect of the vital force. And I like that term vital force, as it is somewhat culturally relevant for us. It's not a very common term, but it is a term that was once used in Western culture out of respect to the patient, if it was in a medical setting, or philosophically looking at the capacity of the human being. And you could say it goes back to Greek times, or really, I think it transcends all cultures and times, and anyone who had developed thought and philosophy and throughout various realms of society had incorporated this concept to some extent. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And I guess I'll start briefly with a bit of my own story, my own journey. So becoming a bioregional herbalist, to me, after, I'd have to say now, about 7 or 8 years at least into my path, I had the opportunity to begin to reflect on where I'd been. Look back along that path, reflecting on the experiences, the way they had touched me, my experiences with plants and the landscape and people. And by that point, it had become quite rich and extensive. And so I began to formulate what that meant to me in simple concepts. And bioregional herbalism was the simplest way of stating that. And it really, there's a lot that I could say, but one of the fundamental ways to describe it is that intrinsic relationship between the people, the place, and the plants. In no particular order, but certainly because it's coming from our perspective, I usually say people first, as we're always learning not only about ourselves, of course, but the plants and the people. And it was in that context where my formative experiences took place in relationship to the people along the way that reflected back to me. And those experiences that I was having, I would say primarily at first with the landscape, the totality of a place and all of the energetics around that, what one may feel in a place. I would imagine each of you can recall a place you've been where you felt really good, regardless of there being another person there or not, or a place that whatever made you uncomfortable in some way, to oversimplify it. But the working relationship with place can become quite complex, and that's where the relationship is woven from that, those experiences, those insights, what we've been taught either from those that came before us, or what we experience for ourselves, and each of us is an amalgamation of that. So in particular, in relation to plants and herbalism, that's how my formative basis, the matrix of my being was originally formed, and the inspirations that came to me to walk on this path were entirely in that context. In fact, my first experience, I would have to say, in a classroom, an indoor classroom, with a renowned herbalist, before I had joined any program or class, was quite unsettling to me. for the fact that we were seated in chairs at tables and listening to someone talk about plants as opposed to being out in the field and experiencing plants, because that had been almost the totality of my experience after initially reading about plants in books of Chinese medicine and going to Chinese markets, and when I lived in New York, and attempting to procure some of these interesting herbs that I had and foods that I had learned about in these books. But that was more just whetting my appetite philosophically and experientially to some degree with the plants. And then it was uh, that surrender, that surrender of moving myself out into the unknown. And of course, we usually don't know what we're doing when we do that, but sometimes we do. And in that case, I really didn't know. And in fact, I found myself in a great number of situations where I was face to face with, quote, becoming an herbalist when I never really sought it out. I never really asked for it. But there were people along that path for me to reflect back to me what was within me, and perhaps to some extent where I came from and what I was here to do. And that I can appreciate as a unique situation, and perhaps many people haven't quite experienced it like that. But for me, that's how it worked. And despite making numerous efforts to turn away from it and to try to do something else, or to not fully engage with learning about plants, however that meant for me at the time, uh, it was like I was on a rotating platform that no matter where I decided to get off or what direction I decided to walk, there was that path of returning to plants. And people, well experienced people or authentic people, or people who had authentic relationships with both the landscapes and the land, were there to inform me. And so that's why I can say so heartily that it's the matrix of my being becoming an herbalist, such that I experienced it and thought of it, lived it in a way, an unusual way than most, I suppose, would be experienced with or exposed to today, such that I never really thought about it as a career or as something to go to school for, and possibly even not even really thinking about reading books about it, to be honest, because it was so experiential for me. But of course, I did go down that path. But I wanted to say something about that aspect of surrender, because it's a common thought when someone is about to engage in a path of study, in particular in our culture, to ask the question, or at the very least think about it: what am I going to get out of this? And it's a valid question, um, and in honesty, it's a difficult question to authentically answer. And that's where I feel this particular approach of vitalist herbalism really comes to the surface, in that it's a really ultimately comes down to a trusting, a surrender into something that you have the courage to trust, if in fact it's something that you feel called from within. And I would imagine to some extent, each person could connect with that in their own way at whatever time in their life. Because my approach to vitalist herbalism now, as it's evolved over the years, is not really geared towards creating an herbalist in the conventional sense, as I once thought when I began my apprenticeships 14, 15 years ago. I had envisioned creating an army of herbalists that would be trained to learn to know herbs in all the ways, knowing the different names from the different cultures, where to find the herb and when, what season, uh, how to gather it, when to gather it, how to prepare it, so on and so forth, and all the various ways to apply it clinically and so forth. And that it became pretty clear to me quickly that that wasn't really the way forward. That way lay a lot of frustration for me. And so I started to connect to where people were at, and found that the experiences of being in nature, regardless of what they were trying to get from it, but just what was available to them, was quite significant. It was profound. And when I first really surrendered to that with a small group fact, two friends joined me uh, on a 4-day trip. I can still recall it well. And that was modeled out of my own experiences and what I was open and willing to share with them as a group attempt to surrender and find this courage to trust in the process. That what was revealed to us was remarkable, even to me, who had set the stage for this class, this 4-day excursion into the wilderness, where we went to the four directions, uh, one each day. And I won't go into all the details, but there was something that emerged through that 4-day experience through each day and coalesced into a cohesive message and experience in healing experience for each of us, such that I was forever changed from that point. It was one of those significant moments of becoming a bioregional herbalist for me at a new level, where my conviction in terms of trusting the process and trusting the surrender really came full circle. Move on to the next slide if I can. Once again, stymied from being able to progress my slides while I'm in the screen share. Let's see. Sorry about that. This happened last time as well. And it works just fine until I get on here. Okay. I think we got it, at least for now. So one of the things that came to the surface for me throughout all of these experiences is, and this really was a later stage discovery in the process of trusting and continually coming back to the landscape and the plants and myself, is in this part of the experience of self, was learning about somatic intelligence and coming to trust somatic intelligence. And that became a real crucial part of Vitalist Herbalism, in the ability of one to learn, how one learns through themselves, for themselves, and about oneself through the experience with the plants. And I add the plants in this case in order to refine the experience. The plants are almost like a centerpiece that exists outside of us, to which we can draw our focus, but also it's not just a placebo in any way, because I see the plants as sentient, but they can reflect back to us in a way that's relevant to where we are at this time. But how we participate in that effectively and authentically is by paying attention to what arises within our body. And there's I might say, subconscious aspect of our bodies, and where perhaps the soul and the physical body merges, that may be the somatic intelligence, and that it resides primarily, if not exclusively, beneath our consciousness, but is nonetheless present and speaks to us in subtle yet often direct ways for how we feel the body, the sensations of the physical body. So within that, we can also tap into the mental and emotional and spiritual, and that way it's entirely interwoven. So in the practice of what I've come to view as my Vitalist Herbalist practice is cultivating this attunement through our body awareness in exercise, learning about the plants in this way, but then also cultivating our own instrument, if you will, to enable us to further deepen our awareness of each individual plant that we work with and plants subsequent. So people who don't necessarily see themselves as intuitive, and I'll go so far as say people that maybe even don't believe in the intuitive capacity, as I see that segment of society shrinking. But once you really subject yourself to this type of exercise, you will not only increase your intuitive capacity, hone it, fine tune it, but maybe reawaken it as well, because it's something that's latent within us, but simply needs attention. And in a world that discourages attention or distracts attention from this fundamental faculty of humanness, it simply is awaiting our attention. And in the same way, the plants are simply lingering nearby awaiting our attention. Ah, there we go. Somehow it works on the second try. So within all of this, of course, is or surrounding this us and this experience is Mother Nature, and the signs and the support and the guidance is all around us. We simply need to show up, observe, patiently observe and listen. And this is the challenge. I recognize that. And the way that I often refer to it in my classes is that we have a tendency collectively as a culture, and each of us are individuals, of course, but our how we're molded by our culture, and to each of us individually, how we take to that, we have a more acquisitive tendency about the world around us. What can I get? Whether we're going shopping, it's useful, of course. It enables us to get things done and to achieve and acquire what we want. But one of my famous sayings, if I have such a thing, is that our strengths taken to excess become our greatest weaknesses. And I feel that has become a great weakness of the modern human, in that we are no longer truly receptive in the way that we are capable of being. And that becomes nowhere more apparent than when we're in nature, when someone may feel alone or may feel disheartened in some way, or missing where they come from, or missing whatever, internet connection or whatever it may be. To me, that's an indication of kind of a slight pull on that part of ourselves from the wisdom of the natural world around us. And it's encouraging us and inviting us to actually reawaken to what's right at our fingertips or at our heart center, I might say specifically, that is our true inheritance, our right as humans to connect with this creation of the Creator. And that's the core of this approach to vitalist herbalism. And in that process, developing the faculties as an individual to surrender to that, to trust in that, and to develop discernment through that process. Because discernment is what really distinguishes us from an intelligent life form, and versus just a floating leaf in the water to be taken any which way. Not to say that that isn't part of our process at times, to completely surrender and succumb to all outward forces and let it sweep us away. I think women understand that better than men in their own makeup. But to trust our instincts, not just our intellectual capacity or our logical, rational minds, but trust our instincts, which is something that we may have otherwise been trained to second guess or ignore or suppress, as it may be. I'm trying to, there we go. And yeah, so continuing on, of course, that's the whole point of this is, at least in my mind, developing relationship with plants. It could be anything. I could focus on rocks, I suppose, or animals or birds, but it's been my path to work with plants. And of course, plants, they're more readily available than all the above and easier to catch. And I'm just joking, but that the plants are there in abundance for us to observe and participate with in the context of their setting, of their natural setting. And all of this informs us about their nature. And so that's this, this rich landscape from which we can participate, or with which we can participate, and from which we can extract information that is always responding to us. One of the things I like to say is that in a holistic approach, any diagnostic technique is always going to be a therapy as well. There is no complete abstraction or extraction from the relational experience. To take a pulse with one's hand is a touching from one living being to another. that approach's therapeutic uh, uh, application. It's all in how you approach it. So in the same way that we are with plants, when we're witnessing plants, when we're observing plants, we don't necessarily we're not relegated, and I'll get to this in a later slide, but we're not relegated to what the biochemical reactions may dictate about how plants engage with us or how they may affect us. And why I get this every time I try. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now it jumped ahead too. Yes, so this is exactly the next slide. So this is, I don't really want to emphasize too much in the course of this presentation what vitalist herbalism isn't, but it is important, I think, to clarify some things in terms of what may be presumed about herbalism because of what we have now, more than a quarter century of marketing and books and so forth and education to some extent about what herbalism is. And so vitalist herbalism, to make that distinction, in some ways, this is kind of like saying extra virgin olive oil, because olive oil used to be olive oil, and then they adulterated, so it became virgin olive oil, and then it had to be, and they adulterated that, and then it had to become extra virgin olive oil. Sorry, that was my light right there. And so, sorry. And so herbalism is now vitalist herbalism in this manner of speaking to help clarify what it isn't. And so it's not reductive. And in a reductive approach, vitalist herbalism becomes mechanistic. It becomes exclusive to how the parts fit with each other and how they work in an acute, refined, or compartmentalized sense, i.e., the Cartesian model, that philosophy from the so-called Renaissance, in which Descartes proclaimed, "I think, therefore I am," as if the beingness of the human derives from their intellectual capacity. That's the statement. Whereas vitalist herbalism recognizes that it's the vital force that brings the being, as if to say also that the soul or the spirit of the human resides in the body. It is the soul or the spirit that makes the body, that brings the body to life. That's how we have a body remaining after death. But the spirit or the soul, the true person, the person is gone, but the body remains. So that's the way in which vitalism honors the vital force, that which brings life to the physical form. And so to be holistic over reductive is another way of saying, in part, what I was just saying. And expansive and interdependent. So expansive means that in some regards that there's an abundant quality to this vital force. It's what brings growth to the living world, both within ourselves and the natural world of plants and animals and so forth. And interdependent is to speak to how things are interrelated. That is infinitesimal. That's the complexity which is beyond our intellectual capacity, I believe, but it is something that's so rich and always available to us when we can approach it in the way that makes it accessible to us. And that would be through the heart mind, through the heart mind, as I refer to later down on this list, which holds the rational mind. That's to say that the heart mind is comprehensive, and the rational mind is a tool within the greater totality of the being. And that is a truly fundamental piece of vitalist herbalism. And again, it's not to exclude the rational mind. As I just related there, I'm speaking about it including the rational mind. Doesn't exclude it. But as things are in our culture today, the reverse has happened, where the rational mind essentially, in large part, excludes the heart mind. When I say the heart mind, I recognize the heart, the physical heart, as an intuitive organ, an organ of perception. And that has been, so-called scientifically um, revealed and understood and demonstrated through various ways in which heart frequency can be measured and how the heart generates hormones that communicate directly with the brain, and always as if the heart is not as if, but these findings reveal what traditional peoples knew and a vitalist herbalism believes, is that the heart is the orchestrator, it is the conductor of the physical body. And as the Chinese spoke of the heart, it's where the shun resides in their language. The shun is like how it was explained to me, it's that part of yourself that extends beyond yourself and relates to the world around you. So that would be the part of oneself where we can still be individuated, yet be in connection or in communion with this aspen tree here in the photo. And that's my experience, and that's what I have facilitated for many people as an herbalist in the field, and that's the core, another core piece of what I see as vitalist herbalism. So going back up the list, I say biochemical model is not all fact. So that's another point of consideration, let's call it, in that many aspects, as I've come to learn, especially over the past 4 or 5 years in my study, that what we've assumed to be true or is spoken about as true or represented to be true in the sense that this is truly an aspen tree. Even if that was an AI generated image, I know where an aspen tree exists. I've touched them. I understand their life form from observation. I can verify that with with the spirit of my being. Whereas there are many aspects to the biochemical model as it relates to physiology and so forth that have never been substantiated. No one's ever seen it. There are things that we've built a model on top of and are assumed to be true, but they really have never been substantiated. So vitalist herbalism uh, treads lightly in areas where um, a model has not yet been substantiated. And the vital force comes from the creator. This is a sense that there is a source of this vital force that is everlasting. And in that way, we can rely upon something greater than ourselves. And that enables us in this initial period, you might say, of trust and surrender. I say initial period, but it's a continual renewal because, as I'll speak later, this is about cycles as well. And I like to say that trust comes from proof. We trust something, we trust the floor because we can walk on it and it holds us up. We trust the chair because we sit on it and lean back on it and it holds us up. Whereas faith comes from the heart and the soul, something that cannot be grasped. We don't know, we can only try, we can only have faith. So they're, of course, very closely related, but I'm making that distinction there. And to move from trust through verification in a mechanistic or rationalistic way, the vitalist herbalist moves beyond that into faith through the heart and the soul, and in trusting also in their experience. Host resistance over concept of pathogen, that ties into aspects of the statement about the biochemical model, but it's also how I personally will allow myself to consider the possibilities of an individual's capacity to heal and what may be happening for that individual. So it's a more comprehensive, I say, expansive and holistic model. That statement in of itself could warrant several-hour presentation. So I'll just leave it at that for now. The body seeks healing when unobstructed. That's a fundamental rule, you might say, or law of vitalist herbalism or vitalism in general. To understand and accept that is a principal step in becoming a vitalist herbalist. And one often needs to experience that to really have faith in that, to be honest, or perhaps trust in it. At this point, I can say I can trust in it because I've seen the proof within myself and to some extent with others. But this steps out of the mentality of the body being inherently damaged, let's say, or broken, but that an obstruction which may produce chronic illness or create an injury to the organism or produce a continual weakening of the organism. There's a wisdom. I think another statement could be made here in that there's a wisdom behind that obstruction, and it is through self-discovery and awareness and reconnection, reintegration of the life force within oneself and without that allows for those obstructions to be removed. And thus the vital force can return to restoring a state of harmony within the body. And that is the way in which plants know us. And they seek, through a relationship with plants, they seek to help us restore that. That has been my experience. So that to me is demystified the experience of how plants heal, because when I began on this path and had influences coming into my ear from books or whatever it might have been, shamans or what have you, about what an incantation could do. And not to say that, there aren't real experiences that people have in those surreal experiences, but that there is a really clearly perceivable, if you slow down enough, open port of communication between ourselves and plants in which we can slowly assimilate these experiences and this knowledge to transform ourselves one small step at a time. And I might say that what really bridges that gap for us between let's say not knowing that and then becoming open to it and trusting and surrendering and applying ourselves in that way is love. Love ultimately for ourselves and allowing ourselves to receive the love that is available and abundant around us. And to say love over fear, maybe the greatest obstruction to our bodies seeking that healing is a state of fear, a perception of fear within ourselves. Of course, all more easily said than done, but when we have the concept, we can orient ourselves properly as we proceed down the path. So I wanted to take a little time today and talk about the seasons and the elements. So my view of the seasons is that we have pivotal times throughout the year. We have the earth, we have the sun. The sun marks very specific times on the horizon at which its relationship with the earth changes significantly. The further you go on the hemisphere, north and south, the more significant that is. We have the equinoxes and the solstices. We are now approaching an equinox, the autumn equinox. That'll be a time when the day is equal to the night. So this is another transition time. Traditionally, particularly in my ancestral culture, there's a great import placed upon those quarter days in between these major solar transitions of the equinoxes and solstices. So many of which are present in our cultural landscape today, Halloween being possibly the most famous one. Halloween, not specifically on the date, but within a few days, is really close to that time, that interim time, exactly between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. And these make really beautiful times for us for reflection on where we have been, what we have experienced, what we have done that we perhaps sought out to do, or maybe what we were reluctant to do or had missed opportunities and so forth. And then recalibrating, reintegrating, and reassessing and making decisions, taking in information to then possibly make decisions and move forward. So these are the cycles, one could say, within cycles. And all of this, whether we're conscious of it or not, I would argue is having an effect on our being, such that when we work with herbs, the more conscious we are with these things, the more empowered we may be. through our ultimately through our relationships with the entire world around us. So these interactions and influences and this cadence that I refer to, there's an overlapping. Uh, in all things, there's an overlapping. When I had the opportunity to practice Tai Chi and Qigong with my teacher for a number of years, albeit infrequently, it was very clear the movement of energy was reflective of ocean waves, but waves within waves, waves within waves. And so it's this cycling of energy where there's a overflowing and there's a retreating. There's an overflowing, there's a retreating. And this is happening to each of us, one may say, through each heartbeat, through each breath, through each day, each season, and so forth, each year. And the softer we bring our attention, or the more quiet we become, the more attuned we become to these things. It's not to say that that's all there is for us to do in life, is simply follow these, but some would argue that is the case. The more spiritualized societies who shun materialism, essentially that is, in my opinion, what they're doing is tapping into these cycles and attuning to them, and moving into a flow with these cycles, such that they know and or experience some state of spiritual fulfillment. In the seasons, we experience harmony in different ways, visually, outwardly. When we see, for example, in this photo here in the mountains, in the Chiricahuas, in the, I guess, later autumn, this might have been mid to late autumn, there's a sense of harmony to know that these plants are turning, these trees are turning the color of their leaves at this time when we would expect them to. There's a certain external harmony for us in that. And there may be less perceptible aspects of that harmony through our experience of that environment, how we experience the smell of the air, how we experience the temperature. Think for yourselves, as I know for myself, is as soon as, say, the first couple days of autumn, if I was out early as I was in the morning air before sunrise, I could perceive the slightest hint of coolness, even just for a momentary breeze, to give me the indication that this season was coming. And even though it was 108 or whatever yesterday, in the morning, that morning, and certainly the day before, it was quite a fresh breeze in the morning. So there's those cycles within cycles. There's cool weather coming on the surface, but underneath it, there's still a great sphere of heat, let's call it, that is moving. And so attuning to each of these aspects within ourselves, even if we're just making note of it and paying attention consciously, is an aspect of attuning to the seasons and the elements. The elements, we could put them in a couple of ways, but quite simply, you could say that the elements in different cultures had different ways of assessing them, or different numbers of elements, you might say. But in their most basic, you have air, water, and earth. And you can Chinese add metal in there, and wood, and so forth. And the Indians had different degrees of air. There was air and there was ether, as to speak to more of the immaterial, unseen realm. But nonetheless, we have the basic building blocks that aren't part of the periodic table, let's say, not that deductive and rationalistic, but in all the life around us, as well as within us, one finds these elements. So that is something that bespeaks harmony and cohesiveness in the world around us. And to be present with that is an essential part of not to ever discount that, is a part of Vitalist Herbalism. And please understand, I don't mean at any point in time to necessarily dumb us down as humans for our intellectual capacities. But as I said earlier, I do feel that we have, to our disadvantage and to our own expense, shunned certain aspects of ourselves, consciously or unconsciously, at the favor of something that is actually subservient to something much greater. In other words, again, to restate, that the heart mind holds the rational mind. It encapsulates it. It has more than enough room within it as a concept, as a presence, as a state of being for the human to hold the rational mind as well. But within all of this, as I've been speaking, is reflective of the classic Hermetic principle, known to be brought from an ancient culture to restore high culture within the world after, as many cultures would say, an epoch of great wreckage, or a reckoning in which high societies and high cultures and advanced civilizations were brought asunder, and Hermes was one who carried that knowledge on. Or in Egypt, they may have called him Thoth, or perhaps Mercury in Greece, and perhaps the mighty Lu in Irish history. All of those characters have been compared as the bringer of knowledge, or the one of many, the many skilled, the Samil Dana, as Lu is referred to in Irish literature. That's the many skilled one. They brought this concept: as above, so below, as within, so without. As to say, you could say that as exists in heaven, as exists on earth, or the macrocosm is in the microcosm, and vice versa. And that is another key principle of Vitalist Herbalism. So this is a part that has been very important to me, and I won't belabor it much here, but honoring ancestral wisdom has actually been brought forth for me from the landscape. It is another testament, in my opinion, to the inherent wisdom of the living landscape, and how an individual's path may be evoked from their experience, or by and through their experience with the landscape. As I was able to reconnect in profound ways with my ancestral heritage and my ancestors, despite being far from the lands that I understood them to be from. And that was through connection with the landscape. So this sort of healing may be more or less significant to each individual on their path, but as I began to share more openly about these experiences of mine about 6 or 7 years ago, it became really clear to me how relevant this was to a lot of people, especially of my generation and younger. So this is another key component that is available to us through the practice of Vitalist Herbalism. So just laying them out here more simply, less prosaic, these are some of the core principles of Vitalist Herbalism. Patient observation is certainly something I've mentioned. As when I'm doing field classes, it became the theme that was evoked from my experience with my foraging students last year, was that continued and patient observation is what brings forth knowledge. And that can be applied to our experience with the plants in the field, and our experience with ourselves as we're exploring and experiencing what the plants do for us, or do to us, or how they interact with us. This takes a relatively two-dimensional experience of, plant applications on a paper, or what components or constituents they're comprised of, and what those constituents are meant to do, and so forth, almost as if we're a clerk in a factory, learning the qualities of our widgets and so forth. But there's so much more there in the presence of the vital force, which is what's available to us between the plants and ourselves within the landscape. And so nature is fluid is one of the highlighted here, because it is a very important principle to continuously come back to. I find when my students have gotten stuck on certain things, preconceived ideas, or perhaps beliefs or ways of thinking that were inhibiting them from being able to better comprehend what they're experiencing with plants. And to understand and accept that nature is fluid allows for us to be in a bit more of a fluid perspective in what we expect from the world, what we expect from ourselves, or even from the plants. It's a harmonizing, you might say it's a harmonizing viewpoint. yet one that is reflected back to us continuously from um, our authentic observations of nature and ourselves in nature. So here they are listed out a little more clearly, which I've been speaking to this already. Um, Vital force is omnipresent. There are no exceptions, yet the vital force may be obstructed from its clear path. This is where healing is called for. That's crucial to understand. And usually at some point, I have been in this path until I've been in this position until I was presented the opportunity to learn the, the comprehensiveness or the omnipresence, if not omnipotence, of the vital force that resides within us from Creator. And um, and I accepted that opportunity, and it really taught me a lot. But this is often where um, the individual who's somewhat skilled or even highly skilled in quote natural healing or herbalism may say, well, it's so serious now, or it's gotten to the stage it's so serious that we or things are as they are now, we better consider something serious. And the real seriousness that I would contend in such a situation that I'm very roughly describing would be how obstructed the body has become chronically to the vital force. I'm not talking about like arm hanging on by a thread type of situation. I'm not really posing a miracle situation. I'm looking at how illness is expressed symptomatically within the body through discomfort or acute inability to function, and how that is a direct expression of the body, of the somatic intelligence, the uh, of the attention that is needed. And yes, attention can be so sparse, can be so necessary in such great demand that if it isn't presented sufficiently and quickly, the life force leaves the body. So in that way, yes, it's serious, but um, I may not be making the best metaphors and so forth to fully express what I'm trying to at this point, but that is a key point of vitalist herbalism. Without exceptions is also what I'm trying to say. Integrity. Although we must act with integrity to be in alignment with our highest good, it must also be recognized that integrity of the organism is the base state. When that integrity is compromised, each body responds in unique ways to compensate. So that relates to the above statement in that the integrity of the organism is our natural state, but then something interferes with that, such as to render the body in a relative state of alarm. And the wisdom of the body, the somatic intelligence, you might say, but the wisdom of the body is now compensating, is working to compensate. And the compensations are honest and usually the best effort, but rarely, if ever, sufficient to be maintained or ever intended to be maintained indefinitely, but are simply ways in which we seek to rectify an untenable situation. And as such, if I can relate this back to some things I was saying earlier about what's essential about the practice of becoming a vitalist herbalist or practicing bioregional herbalism, is that relationship with somatic intelligence, because that's where these expressions are coming forth to us when we're available to hear them about the status of the integrity of the organism, how we feel in relation to plants. That can come in such a myriad of ways, whether it's images, a narrative, sensations in the body. All of this is feasible. Any one of them, or even all of them comprehensively for an individual at one time. This is what makes it so incredible. Maybe that's not the best word because that would state that I don't believe it, but makes it so phenomenal and amazing and wonderful to witness this practice as we are essentially unleashing what is inherently part of our human capacity, and we're inviting it out through very subtle, slow, safe, gentle practices and experiences with plants. In that regard, I'll say one more thing before I go on to the next slide, in that it's become quite popular. It's become quite fashionable. Um, the term plant medicine, I don't even use that expression anymore, because in common parlance, it's come to refer to, I believe, most commonly to like working with entheogenic, so-called entheogenic plants that, if you're to unbox that term, it means like brings you into direct perception of God. Or, I'm not saying that that's what I think, but that's essentially what that word means, or psychotropics, or quote hallucinogenic plants, really potent plants that can take you on a significantly powerful trip. And you don't really know how you got there, and when you got back, you don't really know how you got back often. I'm not entirely disparaging the experience, because I've had those experiences in my youth that were exceptionally informative to my growth on this path, and really enabled me on this path. But my point being is that through this practice of vitalist herbalism, it is a slow and gentle approach in which you are consenting along the way to what you're willing to experience, what you're willing to feel from your body. And when you decide that you don't want to feel something, you're in the position to recognize that you're choosing not to feel that. The time and the compression of the moment is expanded when we slow down and pay close attention, such that now we have that experience to reflect on. That in of itself can be a very potent experience, to recognize that we felt something and now we're not really willing to feel that. And what at what cost? So those are some examples of how the practice of vitalist herbalism, when we're working intimately with plants in developing our knowledge about the plants, and it's something that I still engage with myself. It's a matter of recalibrating and reassessing our ourselves. So we're getting pretty close. I'm going to leave this up for a moment, and then I think pass on to the next slide, because I need to wrap up close to 4:30 today. Um, I think I've addressed a lot of this as well: deepening plant relationships, observation, feeling, connecting, and integrating. There's a lot of that I just alluded to in the last slide. So I really think it's important to understand that you're not alone on this path. Whether you are an individual, doing this at home, or reading a book, or doing an online course, what have you. Um, but that you're part of an even greater community than what I'm alluding to or referring to here, of the natural world, and to begin to perceive yourself as part of that web, and to tap into it, is really the potency that I'm speaking on here, that vitalist herbalism is all about. And it really does take practice for most everyone, at some level, and it does take developing qualities that render those experiences as useful to us, and not disturbing or confounding or instilling doubt in some way, or anxiety. But trusting ourselves along the way is what's really important, really, really crucial. But having a community in which you can also experience this with other people, and see other people experiencing something similar to you and how they respond to it, that is an example of rising tides lifting all boats. So as we continue on the path is always evolving before us. And this is the concept of nature as fluid. As I walk down this path that's in the photo, I've walked down it once. I can never walk down that same path again. The way I can see it or feel it will be forever changed. The lighting will be different. Even if I replicate that lighting the exact same time on the next year or on the other half of the year as it might be, it's still not quite the same thing. So continuous growth is returning to these new experiences as if they really are new, or recognizing that they really are new. And that's really how we deepen the connections both within us and around us. So herbalism is in recognition of all of this, and therefore it does require a great deal of patience, both within ourselves and with the world around us. The timeline doesn't often happen in the way that we want or that we expect. But I would say that underneath all of this, what the one might say the benefit would be is that we grow and expand in this slow and steady pace to a tremendously uh, solid foundation. A solid foundation in which, um, when challenges arise, that uh, challenges to, let's say, apply an herb in a particular way, or challenges of how to help oneself or another with an herb, or what can I trust in the potency of what I've been learning about this plant or from this plant. It's that solid foundation that gives us the support to meet those challenges. All right, so before we wrap up here in a few minutes, I really wanted to let you guys know about my course. Some of you are aware already because I know you're enrolled. So thank you very much. And I think it's going to be an exciting year. This is a 12-month cohort. This is the first time I'm doing this online, but this new online community that I'm creating, it's going to foster a lot of possibilities for learning, not just within our class time, but also engagement with the students within the community. Um, there are three different tiers, excuse me. Two of those tiers, 2 and 3, will participate in the live monthly Zooms, and then tier 1 will also get a copy of those live monthly sessions within the community, and everyone will be getting the same exercises and assignments that coordinate with the plant of the month. So that's going to be where the unity exists amongst all the participants, no matter where you're at. People could join this from any part of the country or even outside of the country for that matter. Yes, these herbs would by and large be more, would pertain more so to the Southwest, but not exclusively. And but nonetheless, the concepts, the core concepts and principles are universally applicable. And that's really where the focus will be on. We'll just be utilizing what I have the most experience with, and that way I can transmit the most value to you when we explore and experience those plants. So there's some additional things that come with joining upwards of the tier 3, and that will be the only in-person, in the field component as part of the tier 3 level, where we'll do a 3-day immersion. All the stuff that you guys will be doing on your own and talking about in the Zoom, we'll get together and do that in the field. Some of you here today have done that with me before, and so you know how fun and exciting that can be. I want to show you, as I show you these slides, how about this, since we're nearly coming to the end here, I recognize that some people might have some questions, either about what I said or perhaps some aspect of the course. So if you have a question and you want to put your little hand out there, your golden hand, I think everyone should have that somewhere on your Zoom dashboard. I was using Zoom in October of 2019 when I think hardly anybody knew about it, and so nonetheless, I feel still kind of like a Zoom neophyte in 2024, but I'm getting back at it. So I don't see any questions, but I'll just continue. There's a question. Yeah, Emily, you can unmute yourself.
Hi there, John. Thanks for
Hi.
that. That was nice to listen to. I was making dinner And yeah, that was nice background. I was curious about the cost.
Yes, the cost, do I have that on here? I don't. It's on the website, and I don't want to misrepresent because I don't have the numbers memorized, but there is a deal right now on the tier one. I know that that is like 40% off. I have a limited number of those available. And I'm pretty sure that one is at 621 currently. But you all will receive, if you haven't already, via email, direct link to these pages where you can see all those details. Any other question? Just that? But yeah, the tier one is the lowest cost, and tier two and tier three up from there. And so tier two would be everything in tier one, but you'll also be getting the monthly herbal package, inclusion in live sessions, um, all these pre-recorded videos, which relate to a lot of the things that I've been addressing here, but in much greater depth. John, you've got a question. Go ahead.
It's more of a comment. I've gone ahead and enrolled in the tier one. I don't want to again like you said, misrepresent the cost, but one of the little ahas that came to me was that if somebody thinks the cost is prohibitive, I think you have sort of a graduated way to pay for a way to pay for it over time, so you don't have to throw the whole amount down at once. So
Well,
that was
I thought I did. I
oh,
appreciate you bringing that up,
oops.
John. I tried to make it happen, and I did. I think I must have mentioned that in one of the emails after someone had contacted me about it, and it turns out it's not available on non-physical products. So that might be what you're alluding to. But if if that is an issue for more people, I have received word from some already. Don't hesitate to reach out to me, and we'll see what else I can muster. Thanks, though, John. Appreciate you mentioning that. Yeah, and so the tier three, just finishing up on that. Everything in the beginner and the intermediate, but then you also get included in this package the 3-day field study, which will be 3 days camping at Catalina State Park here locally, and then you also get private one-on-one monthly coaching calls with me. And so that could run the gamut, whatever you're working on. For some people, when they're doing the exercises, they might be butting up against some of their own individual limitations, let's say. And so we can work very subtly on that together. I can do tutorials on the plants if you're struggling with understanding plant energetics. I can even address individual health concerns if that's also coming up for you. So all of that's included in those one-on-one monthly coaching calls. It's just depending on yourself and what your interests are. And that link is supposed to be working right there on your screen where it says register now. If you want to try clicking on that, it'll take you to the page with all the pricing on there as well. So that's going to wrap, unless there's any other questions that I could answer here in a minute or two. That should be it for the presentation. And you each will receive a recorded version of this webinar sometime later tonight once the recording is completed and up. And then if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to ask. I do plan on doing one more of these webinars next Tuesday on the 5th. So feel free to share this, the website link, or if you get on the email, never hesitate to share that email. I'm happy to share that with as many people as you like. And then there'll be a new registration page for that new webinar. So I'll be doing something similar, but I'll take a piece of it like I did today and expand on it a bit more. All right, I've got a volleyball game to get to, so for my daughter. So everyone have a great evening. Thanks for joining me, and take care. Bye-bye.